For 40 years, doctors watched men die. They wrote notes as the sickness hollowed them out. They called it research. Pause. How far would you go in the name of science? Because in a quiet corner of America, in red clay fields where poverty was older than the roads, an experiment began that would quietly betray hundreds of men who trusted the very people sworn to heal them. No chains, no prison bars, just white coats and silence. It began in the rural South, in a place where the air felt thick in summer and the soil stained your hands the color of rust. A place where men rose before sunrise, worked fields that did not belong to them, and came home exhausted to wooden houses lit by kerosene lamps. This was Macon County, Alabama, home to small churches, dirt roads, and families who had survived generations of hardship. At the heart of it stood the respected Tuskegee Institute, a symbol of pride, education, and hope. Most of the men here were poor sharecroppers. Many couldn't read. Most had never seen a doctor unless something was already terribly wrong. Healthcare was a luxury. Trust was not. When government doctors arrived, carrying clipboards and promises of free medical care, it felt like a blessing. They were representatives of the U.S. Public Health Service, an official body, the government, authority, science. They told the men they were being treated for something called bad blood. Bad blood could mean anything: fatigue, headaches, anemia, joint pain. It was a familiar phrase. It wasn't frightening. The doctors offered free checkups, free meals on examination days, free burial insurance. To men who counted pennies for flour and salt pork, that offer felt like mercy. The program seemed simple: examinations, blood tests, occasional treatments. The men lined up in press shirts. They joked in waiting rooms. They believed they were part of something good, something that might even help their community. It felt ordinary, routine, even hopeful. But there was something the doctors did not say. The men were not being treated. They were being observed. Behind closed doors, medical professionals described them differently, not as patients, as subjects. The truth was this: many of these men had syphilis, a disease that, untreated, slowly destroys the body. It begins quietly, a sore, a rash. Then it disappears as if healed, but it doesn't heal. It burrows inward, into the heart, the brain, the nerves, and over years, sometimes decades, it unravels a human being from the inside. The experiment was never about curing them. It was about watching what happened if they weren't cured. At the time, effective treatment existed. Not perfect, but available. And later, something even more powerful arrived. Penicillin. A miracle drug, a cure. But the men in Macon County would not receive it. The decision had already been made. The study would continue. The men kept coming back. Year after year, they believed they were receiving care. Doctors performed spinal taps, painful procedures, and told them it was special treatment. They wrote down reactions, measured deterioration, documented decline. When the men grew weaker, it was recorded. When they lost their eyesight, it was recorded. When confusion crept in, when memory faded, when personality shifted into something distant and unrecognizable, it was recorded. No one told them the truth. No one explained the risk. When penicillin became widely available in the 1940s, it was distributed across the country. Soldiers received it. Civilians received it. Prisoners received it. But the men in Macon County were deliberately denied it. Letters were sent to local draft boards instructing them not to treat the men, even if they were called into military service. Doctors intervened to make sure the cure never reached them. The experiment mattered more than their lives. Wives were infected. Children were born with congenital syphilis. Families carried pain they could not explain. All the while, the study continued quietly, funded and supported. Reports were written. Papers were published in medical journals. Conferences discussed the valuable data. Valuable. That word echoes differently when you realize what it cost. Some of the men began to suspect something was wrong. Why weren't they getting better? Why did the weakness persist? Why did friends in neighboring towns recover with new medicines while they were told to wait? But challenging a doctor in that era, especially as a poor black man in the segregated South, was unthinkable. Authority was absolute. Trust was survival. And so they endured. For decades, what makes this story unbearable isn't just that it happened, it's how long it happened. The study began in 1932. It did not end until 1972. 40 years. Entire lifetimes passed under observation. The public knew nothing. Until a whistleblower stepped forward. A young public health worker named Peter Buxton learned of the study and felt something twist in his gut. He raised concerns internally. He was dismissed. He raised them again, ignored. Eventually, he went to the press. When the story broke in 1972, the nation reeled. Headlines exposed the truth. Hundreds of men had been misled and denied treatment so doctors could document the natural progression of syphilis. It wasn't a secret from a distant century. It was recent, modern, carried out in the age of antibiotics and televised news. Americans were forced to confront an uncomfortable truth, that their own institutions had sanctioned cruelty under the banner of science. The study was finally halted. Investigations began. The men, the survivors, learned the truth about what had been done to them. Imagine discovering, after decades of trust, that your suffering had been intentional, that your doctors had lied, that your pain had been data. Lawsuits followed. In 1973, a class action suit was filed on behalf of the participants and their families. A settlement was eventually reached, offering financial compensation and lifetime medical benefits to surviving men and their infected family members. But no amount of money can restore lost decades. In 1997, standing before survivors and descendants, President Bill Clinton issued a formal apology on behalf of the United States government. He called it what it was. Wrong, deeply, profoundly, morally wrong. He acknowledged that what the government did was shameful, that it betrayed trust, and that it violated the most basic principles of humanity. The apology was broadcast nationally. Some survivors sat in wheelchairs. Some wept quietly. They had waited more than half a century to hear those words. The scandal reshaped American medical ethics. It led to new laws requiring informed consent. Institutional review boards were established to protect human subjects in research. Today, oversight structures like those enforced by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention operate under strict ethical guidelines shaped partly by the horror of what happened in Macon County. But the damage lingers. The study left a scar far deeper than the men it directly harmed. It seeded generational mistrust of medical institutions within Black communities. Mistrust that echoes even today during the vaccination campaigns and public health crises. When officials ask for trust, some remember. They remember white coats and promises. They remember bad blood. They remember silence. The tragedy of the Tuskegee study isn't just about one disease. It's about power. about who is seen as fully human, about what happens when authority decides that certain lives are more useful as experiments than as people. The men in Macon County weren't criminals. They weren't volunteers in a laboratory. They were fathers, husbands, farmers, church deacons, neighbors. They believed they were being helped. Instead, they were watched for 40 years. And that might be the most disturbing part of all. Not that evil was loud, but that it was quiet. Routine, filed away in paperwork, signed off in meetings, smiling at them during checkups. When we talk about dark chapters of history, we often imagine distant wars or ancient cruelty. But this happened in living memory. Photographs exist. Medical charts exist. Voices still tremble when recounting it. The experiment they regret starting wasn't a mistake made in ignorance. It was sustained, defended, protected, until the truth forced its way into the light, and even then the question remains, how many warnings were ignored before someone finally listened? How many times did someone sense something wrong and choose comfort over confrontation? History rarely begins with monsters. It begins with rationalizations, with phrases like greater good, with arguments about data, and with the quiet belief that some suffering is acceptable if it advances knowledge. That belief can turn doctors into observers, observers into accomplices, and institutions into something colder than cruelty, something indifferent. The men of Macon County were not statistics. They were human beings who placed their faith in medicine, and medicine betrayed them. If you think this was disturbing, wait until you hear what happened during the Guatemala syphilis experiments.